So with this one, what we want to do is we want to talk about some other types of crosses and things happening. We're not going to physically do these. These are a little bit above us. You might do these in maybe a genetic course in a genetics lab. But for our purposes, I want you to be aware of them and definitions, but we won't actually physically be working problems. So one idea is the link gene. And this is important because we talked about the law of independent assortment. Well, there are some genes that are linked together. And it's really typically on the autonomic chromosome, and they're really close together. And so what happens is you see these characters that tend to go together. And red hair and freckles are a good example of this. Most people with red hair have freckles. Now, there are some that don't. And there's also freckles don't always show up without getting out in the sun. So it may just be an environmental thing, or they could be separate. But what happens, what I want you to get at and understand is they're very, very close on a chromosome. And so what that means is that things like crossing over don't separate them out. So they're always on the same chromosome. So they tend to go together. And then the chances of them being separated by a crossing over event is small. And so reality is most people with red hair have freckles. That just kind of goes with the thing. So there are some linked gene issues. Not issues. They're not really issues. Well, they can be, I suppose, but in this case, not an issue. All right. Another idea is I want you to know the difference of pleiotropy. The idea is we have these genes, and they have, this gene is for flower color, but reality, there are some genes that have multiple effects, and pleiotropy is an example of this. And so if you have the gene for sickle cell anemia, it causes sickle cell anemia. Your red blood cells will do the sickle shape. But reality is not only does it do that, but there is a host of other issues go along with this, which is fatigue, jaundice, breathlessness, back pain, hand swelling, arms and leg pain, joint pain, foot swelling. So all of those are due to the single gene. So pleiotropy is basically you have a gene that has multiple effects. Epistasis. This is more for fur color. And the idea is it is a characteristic that is multiple gene. And the one gene at a second location will have an effect on what the first gene does. And so we see this in fur color in mice, and actually probably the best example of this would be in dogs and Labradors. They come in, the black color, black labs, yellow labs, and then chocolate labs. And, you can see that chocolate labs are one of the more valuable of the bunch, and because they are fewer of them than any of the others. But anyway, so you can have a gene that basically tells you, and here's the large B, is to be black. But then you can have another gene on this, another gene on a different location that is heterozygous or homozygous recessive that tells you to ignore the first color. And so if that's the case, that's where you get your blonde or your yellow lab. And so this is called epistasis, where one gene has an effect on its second one. All right, then there's polygenic, and this would be skin color in humans. And here's 3 different genes all having an effect on skin color. And then determining what they are will determine how dark your skin is. There are some environmental factors also that play into this. And what we're learning, and I mentioned earlier in one of the videos, is it's really not 3. We think this is all the way down to over 250 different genes. So skin color does have an advantage depending on what kind of habitat you live in and how much sun you're getting and protection for the skin. But a very, very complicated set of genes to set this. So polygenic just basically means that you have, poly means many. So many genes affecting something. In our example, the best example here would be skin color. All right, another polygenic gene is sex. Sometimes this one is called sex influence, and that is male pattern baldness, and there's even female pattern baldness. And X chromosome It is affected by hormones. Higher levels of testosterone usually creates more of a hair loss. And then it may also be affected by other genes that are on the Y. So male pattern baldness is something we don't completely understand yet. We're trying to work out the genetics for. You might hear that, oh, you look at your mom's grandfather, if he's bald, you're bald. That is not always the case. If I will tell you, if he is, chances are you're gonna be. But it doesn't necessarily mean you will be. And so there's lots of different effects. If you've got bald people on both sides of your family, kiss your hair goodbye. I hate, you go to a family reunion and look at that, and you're going to find out what your issues are. And there's different types of pattern, and it also has a lot of environmental stuff, has to do with the healthiness of your follicles. There's lots of myths about, how to hold on to hair or why you lose hair. Wearing a hat makes you lose hair. That's not necessarily true. Although if your follicles get dirty because of a dirty hat, it's possible. So there's all kinds of things. So yeah, the best thing is looking at genetics. Again, if you're looking at both sides of your family and all your family's bald, then life is not good for you. Female pattern baldness, that tends not to be quite as evident. Testosterone levels are smaller. I think females tend to hide it better than males do. People, and it's hard to tell because you guys don't get to see. I do have long hair. You see my little avatar, and people ask why I grow my hair so long, and it's because I am losing my hair. I'm not oblivious to that. My dad was bald. My brother is bald. I held on to my hair longer than anybody in my family, so I guess kudos to me. But if it gets any thinner, I always joke I'm gonna do the comb over. Where I do. You've seen the comb over, and it looks so natural. It actually, I can't tell if you can tell in the picture, but yeah. So if I start doing that, you need to you need to talk to me about that I'm losing my mind. But anyway, so male pattern baldness. And then looking at some of the traits, I would like you to kind of know these recessively inherited traits. The only way you're going to show these is you have to be recessive for both. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily rare. It just means that the only way to get this characteristic is to be recessive for both. And albinoism, you can see the albinos in this picture. You have to have both traits. Tay-Sachs disease is another, and cystic fibrosis. And so these are things that you can be actually tested for before having kids, because neither one of you may have the disease, but you may be carriers of it, especially something like cystic fibrosis and Tay-Sachs, which have long-term effects. So you can make decisions about whether you want to have children or not, or at least what's the likelihood of one of your children having one of these diseases. The other one is dominantly inherited traits. Again, this doesn't mean that there are lots of people out there with them. It just means that to have this, you have to have one of the genes have to be dominant. And the first one, achondroplasia, I can barely pronounce it, but that's dwarfism basically. And so you only have to have one dominant trait. So it is possible for two dwarfs to actually have a normal sized child because if they carry the recessive traits. So most people who are normal size have two recessive traits. Huntington's disease is another one. And what happens with these diseases is typically they're not a lot of them, because if they're deadly, they get taken out. Now, Huntington's disease is deadly, but you still see it pretty prevalent, I guess, for a dominant inherited trait in the world. And it's because it is a disease that attacks the brain, but it typically doesn't attack until the 40s. And what happens with that is by the time you're 40, you probably have already had kids, so haven't been diagnosed. So that is one that is still around. And with that, we'll stop the share and the recording.